Dear listener, if you're here to rest, to fall asleep, or simply to listen quietly, you're welcome. If you enjoy gentle mysteries and soft legends, you can subscribe and leave a comment. New stories arrive regularly. Now, let the night slow down. There is a lake hidden far from main roads, tucked between low hills and silent trees. It does not appear on most maps, not because it is forbidden, but because it is rarely searched for. People who live nearby do not call it mysterious. They call it old. The water is dark, not murky, but deep, as if it absorbs more than light. On still nights, when the wind disappears and the surface becomes perfectly smooth, something strange happens. The lake begins to speak, not aloud, not in words. People standing near the shore sometimes hear their own name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken gently, as if remembered. Those who hear it often look around, expecting someone behind them. But there is no one, only water, only reflection. Local elders say the lake does not call everyone, and it never calls twice in the same way. Some hear their name exactly as it was spoken in childhood. Some hear a name they have not used in years. Some hear a name they no longer answer to, and some hear nothing at all. The lake does not explain itself. It does not repeat. It waits. People who hear their name rarely speak of it openly, not because they are afraid, but because the experience feels private, as if the lake recognized them and chose not to forget. Long before anyone built houses nearby, before paths formed in the grass, the lake was already there, watching, listening, remembering, and it remembers more than names. The first person who openly spoke about the lake did not mean to tell a story. He was an old fisherman, someone who had lived near the water his entire life. The lake was not special to him. It was familiar. He knew when fish would rise. He knew when storms would come. He trusted the water. One evening, long after sunset, he stood by the shore, untangling his line in the dark. The night was still, too still. The surface of the lake reflected the sky perfectly, as if there were no water at all, only depth. That was when he heard it, his name, not spoken from behind him, not carried by the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere at once and nowhere. He did not turn around. He did not answer. He said later that his body reacted before his thoughts did. His hands froze. His breathing slowed. The name was spoken gently, patiently, as if it had been waiting. He described it as recognition, not a call. He stood there for a long time afterward, unsure how much time had passed. Minutes or hours. When he finally moved, the lake was silent again. The fisherman never returned at night, not because he was afraid, but because something had shifted. The lake no longer felt like a place he visited. It felt like a place that knew him. Years later, when asked why the lake remembers names, he said something simple. Names are how the water keeps track, he said, not of where we are, but of who we have been. After his story became known, others began remembering similar moments. A woman recalled standing by the shore as a child, hearing her nickname, one no one had used since her mother died. A man claimed the lake spoke a name he had never told anyone, a name he only saw in old letters. Not everyone who heard the lake felt comfort. Some felt exposed, as if something private had been touched. Others felt relief, as if something forgotten had finally been acknowledged. And some never returned at all. The lake did not change. It did not grow louder. It did not demand belief. It simply remained, waiting, listening, remembering. There is a story that the elders hesitate to tell because it involves a child, and because children listen differently. They do not question. They do not resist. They accept. The boy was no older than 8 or 9. He lived with his parents near the edge of the forest, close enough that the lake was a familiar presence, but far enough that it was not part of daily life. To him, the lake was not mysterious. It was simply there. One afternoon, while wandering alone, he followed a narrow path that curved away from the village. He was not disobedient. He simply drifted, the way children do, without planning to arrive anywhere. The lake revealed itself quietly. No sudden clearing, no dramatic light, just water waiting. The boy sat at the edge, throwing small stones into the surface, watching the ripples fade. That was when he heard it. Not his name, another name. At first, he did not react. Children often hear voices, in wind, in water, in imagination. But the sound came again, clearer this time. It was a name he did not recognize, yet it felt familiar. He repeated it aloud, testing the sound. The lake did not respond. The boy felt no fear, only curiosity. When he returned home that evening, he asked his parents about the name. They did not recognize it. Days passed, then weeks. The name stayed with him. He whispered it when he was alone. He wrote it in the dirt. He dreamed of it, attached to a face he could not see. As the boy grew older, the name faded, not disappearing, but settling somewhere quiet. Years later, long after childhood had ended, he encountered it again. On a document, a signature, a name written in his own hand. It was his future name, one he had not yet chosen, but would. The realization struck him slowly, over many years. When he was asked about it as an adult, he said the lake had not predicted his life. It had simply recognized him before he fully arrived. This unsettled many. If the lake knew names before they were lived, what else did it know? Some began to wonder if the lake did not remember the past, but the shape of what was coming. Others said the lake listened to what a person would become, long before they accepted it themselves. The man returned to the lake once as an adult. He stood at the shore for a long time, waiting. The lake said nothing, but he felt no disappointment. It already spoke, he said, long ago. After that story spread, parents warned children not to wander near the water alone, not because it was dangerous, but because it listened too closely. Yet children continued to go. Some returned changed, some returned thoughtful, some returned quiet, and some, when asked what they heard, only smiled, as if the lake had shared something meant only for them. The elders say this is why the lake does not call everyone. It chooses those who are not yet finished, those who are still becoming. And once a name is spoken, it cannot be unheard. It waits, like water, like time, like the self, before it fully arrives. Not everyone who hears their name turns away. Some people answer. They do not always mean to. Sometimes the response happens before thought can intervene. A woman once stepped closer to the water without realizing she had moved at all. She was visiting the area briefly, staying with relatives near the forest. The lake was not part of her plans. She had no curiosity about it. She stood near the shore only because the path ended there. When her name came, she answered quietly, not aloud, but inside. Later, she said it felt less like speaking and more like allowing. She did not remember what happened next clearly. Only that time seemed to loosen, as if it had been folded and set aside. When she returned to the village, several hours had passed. Nothing about her appearance had changed, but something else had. She stopped waking at night with the same tightness in her chest. The dreams that had followed her for years simply faded. She never returned to the lake. She said she did not need to. Others were not so fortunate. A young man, restless and searching, came to the lake intentionally. He had heard the stories and believed himself ready. When his name was spoken, he stepped forward without hesitation. The water did not move. The lake did not change. But afterward, he became distant, not withdrawn, just misaligned. He spoke as if responding to thoughts no one else could hear. He lost interest in plans, in destinations, in explanations. Eventually, he left the village. No one knows where he went. Some say he followed the sound long after the lake fell silent. There are stories of couples who came together and heard only one name, of siblings where the lake called one and ignored the other completely, of travelers who stood waiting for hours and heard nothing at all. The elders say the lake does not choose based on worth, or desire, or belief. It chooses based on readiness, a condition that cannot be faked. Those who answer do not receive instructions. They are not shown visions. They are not offered answers. They simply leave with something realigned, like a compass quietly corrected. Over time, patterns emerged. Those who answered the lake often made changes they could not explain. They ended relationships that no longer fit. They abandoned paths that once felt inevitable, not abruptly, not dramatically, but steadily, as if a quiet certainty had replaced doubt. Others struggled. They felt pulled between lives, the one they were living and the one they could not quite reach. These people often returned to the lake, hoping to hear the name again. The lake did not repeat itself. It never does. And this, perhaps, is the hardest truth. The lake remembers names, but it does not negotiate. Once spoken, the sound settles where it belongs. Some people learn to live with it. Some spend years trying to outrun it. Some reshape their lives around it, without ever fully understanding why. And a few, very few, learn to listen differently. They stop waiting for the sound. They listen instead to the quiet that followed, the space the name left behind. Because sometimes what changes us most is not what is said, but what remains after. The lake does not follow. It does not interfere. It remains where it has always been, still, watching, remembering, and waiting for the next name that is ready to be heard. The fisherman had known the lake longer than most people knew themselves. He was not a man of legends or beliefs, not someone who searched for meaning beyond the simple rhythm of days. He rose before dawn, prepared his boat with steady hands, and pushed away from the shore while the world was still half asleep. The lake was familiar to him, not mysterious. He knew how the fog settled in the early morning, how the water darkened before rain, how silence could stretch for hours without feeling empty. That morning was no different. The surface of the lake was calm, almost unnaturally smooth, reflecting the pale sky as if it were a second world turned upside down. He rowed slowly, letting the boat drift, listening to the soft sound of water against wood. Time passed unnoticed. The sun climbed higher, then disappeared behind a veil of clouds, and the air grew colder, heavier. It was then that the fog began to rise, not suddenly, but patiently, as if the lake were exhaling. The fisherman did not panic. Fog was common here. He adjusted his course, trusting instinct more than sight, but something felt wrong. The shoreline did not appear where it should have. The familiar landmarks were gone. The water stretched in every direction, silent and unmoving. He called out once, then stopped, feeling foolish. Sound dissolved too quickly here. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. The boat drifted, guided by something he could not name. He later said that at some point, he stopped trying to find his way back and simply sat, allowing the lake to carry him. Hunger did not come. Fear did not arrive. There was only a growing sense of distance from everything he had been before. When he was found weeks later, far from where anyone thought to search, the boat was intact, the nets untouched. His body showed no signs of exhaustion. His hands were steady. His eyes were clear. He spoke slowly, calmly, as if returning from a long rest rather than a disappearance. People expected confusion, trauma, relief. Instead, they found something else. He did not ask what day it was. He did not ask how long he had been gone. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, his words were careful, deliberate. He said he had not been lost. He said the lake had simply taken him somewhere he needed to be. When pressed for details, he offered none that satisfied curiosity. There were no visions, no voices, no dramatic revelations. Only a sense of being held, of time loosening its grip, of something inside him quieting at last. He described it as a space where nothing was demanded of him, where he did not need to decide or prove or endure. The lake, he said, had shown him how small his fear had been and how large his life could feel when fear was set aside. After that, he changed. He still fished, still rose before dawn, but his movements were slower, more attentive. He no longer measured his days by catch or weather. He spoke of gratitude without using the word. He listened to others without interrupting. When storms came, he did not curse them. When the lake was silent, he did not fill the silence. People noticed that those who spoke with him left calmer than they arrived. Some said he had found faith. Others said he had simply found peace. When asked what he believed now, he answered quietly that belief was not something he had gained, but something he had stopped needing. The lake had not given him answers. It had taken his questions and left him with trust. He never disappeared again. He never returned to that part of the lake. He said some journeys were not meant to be repeated, not because they were dangerous, but because they were complete. And when he died many years later, people said the water was unusually still that morning, as if remembering him, as if acknowledging a name that no longer needed to be spoken. She did not come to the lake by her own will. At least, that is how she explained it later, when she tried to understand why she had been there that evening. The day itself had been ordinary, almost forgettable. Work, the road home, a familiar kind of tiredness, a quiet irritation with no clear cause. And yet, instead of turning toward her house, she suddenly stepped onto the path that led to the water, as if someone had calmly and confidently suggested the direction. The lake greeted her with silence. The surface of the water was still, smooth like dark glass, reflecting a sky without stars. She stopped at the shore and felt a strange sense of relief, as if she had finally arrived somewhere she was meant to be. She had not planned to stay long, only to stand there for a moment, to breathe, to let her thoughts settle. But time began to behave differently. Minutes stretched without becoming heavy. Her thoughts slowed, dissolving into the cool evening air. And then she heard her name. Not loudly, not in a frightening way. It did not sound like a call or a whisper. It felt more like a memory of a voice that had once been very close to her. At first, she assumed it was her imagination, that exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. But her name sounded again, clear, certain, spoken in the way only someone who truly knows you can say it. She turned, expecting to see someone on the path among the trees. But the shore was empty. The wind did not move the leaves. The water remained perfectly still. Her name came a third time, and now it carried not an invitation, but recognition, as if the lake was not calling her, but acknowledging her presence. She sat down on a cold stone near the water's edge without feeling fear. Fear would have felt out of place in that moment. Instead, there was a quiet openness, as if a door inside her had been gently unlocked. Thoughts she had avoided for years began to surface on their own, not painfully, but calmly. Memories of who she had once wanted to become, of words left unspoken, of choices made out of necessity rather than desire. The lake remained silent, yet that silence held more meaning than any answer could. Her name was not spoken again, but she felt the conversation continue without words. She does not know how long she stayed there, perhaps an hour, perhaps much longer. When she finally stood up, her body felt light, as if she had awakened from a deep sleep. She had received no revelations, no prophecies, no visions, and yet something within her had shifted. It was as though the lake had reminded her of a version of herself she had almost forgotten. Later, at home, she tried to describe the feeling. She said it was as if she had been named truly, not by habit or paperwork, but by essence. Since then, she does not visit the lake often, not because she is afraid, but because she understands that places like this do not welcome frequent visits. Sometimes one encounter is enough to be heard, and sometimes it is enough to remember your own name the way you had never heard it before. He was 9 years old when he disappeared, and 10 when he returned, though only a single night had passed. The village remembered that evening clearly. It was late summer, the kind of night when the air stays warm and the light lingers longer than expected. Children had been playing near the edge of the forest, chasing one another between the trees. Someone called his name. Someone else assumed he had gone home. No one noticed the moment he was no longer there. When his parents realized he had not returned, the search began immediately. Lanterns moved through the trees. Voices echoed along the paths. The forest answered with its usual sounds, calm and indifferent. No footprints led anywhere useful. No signs suggested fear or struggle. It was as if the boy had simply stepped out of the visible world. They found him at dawn. He was sitting at the edge of a small clearing, not marked on any map, his knees drawn close to his chest, watching the morning light pass through the leaves. He was not crying. He was not cold. He looked up when they called his name and smiled gently, as if waking from a thoughtful dream. He walked home on his own. At first, everyone believed the story would end there. Children wander, forests confuse, fear passes. But something in the boy had shifted, and it became clear in the days that followed. He listened more than he spoke. He no longer rushed through his meals. He asked questions that did not sound like a child's curiosity, but like quiet observations. He stared at the sky as if measuring something invisible. When asked where he had been, he struggled to explain. He said the night felt long, longer than any night should be. He said he had walked until the forest stopped feeling like a place and began feeling like a presence. He said he had sat with someone, though he could not describe who. Not a man, not a woman, not a voice exactly, just something that waited with him. He did not say he was afraid. He said he felt seen. His parents noticed that he no longer asked for reassurance the way he used to. He stopped fearing the dark. He stopped asking what would happen when people died. It was not that he had answers. It was that the questions no longer troubled him. Years passed, and the story became something people spoke about carefully. Some said the boy had simply imagined the night differently. Others said the forest had shown him something it shows very rarely. The boy himself grew into a quiet, thoughtful man. He studied history, not to collect facts, but to understand how people searched for meaning across time. He kept journals, though he rarely shared them. Once, many years later, he wrote about that night. He said that while his body had been gone for only a few hours, his mind had traveled much further. He felt as though he had lived through many small lifetimes in that darkness, not as memories, but as understanding. He had learned that fear often comes from not being noticed, and peace comes from being fully seen, even without words. He returned to the forest only once as an adult. He stood near the place where the clearing might have been, though he could not find it again. He did not feel disappointed. He understood that some places exist only once for each person. When he left, he felt the same quiet certainty he had carried since childhood, that growing older does not always happen in years. Sometimes it happens in a single night, in a space where time loosens its hold, and something ancient offers a child a glimpse of calm, beyond fear. No one else disappeared that way again. Or if they did not speak of it. But the villagers noticed that the forest seemed unchanged, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. And yet, whenever someone spoke the boy's name, even years later, there was a pause, as though the world itself remembered the night. He returned not older in body, but deeper in soul. He came to the lake with expectations, and that was his first mistake. He had heard the stories long before he ever saw the water. Stories of names whispered at dusk, of people returning changed, of something ancient and attentive resting beneath the surface. He did not come out of curiosity. He came because he wanted proof. Something clear, something undeniable, something that would finally explain the restlessness he had carried for years. He arrived in the late afternoon and stayed until the sky darkened. He walked along the shore slowly, waiting for a moment that felt significant. He watched the light fade and listened carefully to every sound. Each ripple of water, each movement of wind made him tense with anticipation. But nothing happened. No voice spoke his name. No memories rose unexpectedly. No sense of presence settled around him. The lake remained a lake, quiet, empty, unresponsive. He told himself to be patient. He returned the next evening, and the one after that. He sat for hours, forcing stillness, forcing attention, waiting for the lake to notice him the way it had noticed others. But the silence did not change. It was not meaningful silence. It was simply absence. With each visit, his disappointment grew heavier. He began to feel foolish, as if he had been standing outside a closed door that had never been meant to open. The stories that once intrigued him now irritated him. He wondered if the people who spoke of the lake had only heard themselves, if belief had created the experience rather than the place. On his final night there, he stood up abruptly. He felt anger then, sharp and sudden. He accused the lake of being nothing more than water and reflection. He said aloud that he had wasted his time. His voice echoed briefly across the surface and disappeared without response. He left before darkness fully settled. For a long time, he remembered the lake with bitterness. Whenever the subject came up, he dismissed it. He said some people needed mysteries, the way others needed faith. He said he preferred honesty, even if it was empty. Years later, something changed. It was not sudden, and it did not feel important at first. He began to notice moments of stillness in unexpected places, in the quiet of early mornings, in the pause between breaths, in the way certain memories returned without pain. He found himself listening more, reacting less. He could not explain why. One day, while washing his hands at the sink, he realized something that unsettled him more than any story ever had. He had stopped searching, not just for meaning, but for confirmation. He no longer needed the world to speak back to him. He thought of the lake then, not with resentment, but with a kind of understanding. Perhaps he had not been ignored. Perhaps he had been answered in a way he could not hear at the time. Not with words, not with presence, but with refusal. The realization stayed with him. Some places, he understood, do not respond to desire. They respond to readiness. And sometimes, silence is not absence, but a boundary. He never returned to the lake. He did not feel the need to. What he carried away was not disappointment anymore, but humility, a quiet acceptance that not every door opens when we knock, and that some truths reveal themselves only after we stop demanding them. The lake remained unchanged, holding its stillness without explanation. And in that stillness, it had given him something he could only recognize much later. Not a voice, not a vision, but the understanding that being unanswered can also be a form of guidance. He heard a name the moment he stepped onto the shore, and it stopped him in place. It was not his. The sound was faint, carried across the water like an echo remembered rather than spoken. He waited, holding his breath, trying to understand what he had heard. The name came again, clearer this time, shaped by a familiarity that unsettled him. It belonged to someone he had not thought about in years, someone whose absence had quietly shaped his life. He had come to the lake out of curiosity, not belief. He had heard the stories, of course, but he treated them as folklore. When the sound reached him, his first instinct was to dismiss it. Wind, memory, the mind filling silence with meaning. But the name returned a third time, and this time it carried weight. He sat down slowly, his eyes fixed on the water. The name belonged to his younger brother, who had died years earlier, not in a tragic or dramatic way, but quietly, through illness that took more than it announced. They had not spoken much near the end. There had been words left unsaid, apologies postponed until later that never came. He felt no fear. What he felt was pressure, gentle but persistent, as if the moment itself was asking him to stay. Images surfaced without force, small memories, a shared room, arguments that now felt meaningless, a promise once made and never fulfilled. The lake did not explain, it did not accuse. It simply held the name in the air, allowing it to exist without resolution. He realized then that he had not come to the lake seeking mystery. He had come because something unfinished had followed him for too long. The name was not a message, it was an opening. He spoke aloud for the first time, quietly, without expecting an answer. He said the things he had never said, Not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly. The words fell into the stillness and disappeared. The name was not spoken again. When he stood to leave, he felt tired, but lighter, not healed, not transformed, but steadier. The grief he carried did not vanish, but it shifted, losing its sharp edges. It became something he could hold without pain. Later, he would wonder whether the lake had truly spoken, or whether his own mind had finally allowed itself to listen. The question no longer mattered. What mattered was that something had been acknowledged. Some say the lake remembers names. Others say it remembers the spaces left behind when names are no longer spoken. Perhaps it remembers what people refuse to face until silence gives them permission. He never returned to the lake. He did not need to. The name had followed him long enough. Now it rested. The water remained still, offering no explanations, no proof. Only the quiet understanding that not every voice we hear is meant to call us forward. Some exist only to help us finally let go. He did not come to the lake looking for answers. By the time he arrived, he believed he already knew what he had lost. He had lived a careful life, one built on routine and responsibility. Decisions were made logically. Emotions were managed quietly. He rarely allowed himself to linger in moments that felt uncertain. When someone mentioned the lake to him, he dismissed it at first. But the idea stayed, not as curiosity, but as a faint unease, as if something unresolved had found a way to remind him of itself. He came late in life, when many of his choices were already behind him. The lake greeted him with the same stillness it offered everyone else. He stood at the shore, hands in his pockets, waiting without expectation. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as he turned to leave, he heard his name. It was spoken softly, without urgency, not a warning, not a call for attention. It sounded like recognition arriving after long delay. The sound did not stop him. It should have, but it didn't. He hesitated only briefly before continuing down the path away from the water. As he walked, memories rose uninvited. Moments where he had chosen safety over honesty. Times he had remained silent when speaking might have changed something. Relationships allowed to fade, not through conflict, but through careful avoidance. He realized that the name he heard was not asking him to return. It was acknowledging that the moment for return had already passed. He did not go back to the lake that night. In the days that followed, the sound of his name lingered in unexpected ways. He heard it in pauses between conversations, in the quiet before sleep, in the space where intention once lived. It was not haunting, it was patient. He understood then that some places do not wait. They meet us only when our lives are still open enough to be shaped. When he finally recognized this, he felt neither regret nor bitterness, only clarity. He returned to the lake once more, weeks later. This time, he did not wait for his name. He sat down, watched the water, and allowed the silence to exist without resistance. The lake said nothing. It did not need to. When he left, he carried no message, no transformation. But something subtle had shifted. He began speaking more honestly, making smaller, braver choices, allowing himself to be present in ways he had once avoided. The lake remained unchanged, holding its stillness, indifferent to timing and consequence. It had offered what it could, when it could. The rest had been up to him. Some say the lake remembers names. Others say it remembers moments. But perhaps it remembers readiness most of all. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not why it speaks to some, but why we sometimes arrive just a little too late to fully hear what we needed most. Perhaps the lake was never meant to be understood in the way people usually try to understand things. Not as a mystery to be solved, not as a phenomenon to be explained, but as a place where questions are allowed to exist without answers. A place where silence is not empty, but complete. People come to places like this carrying invisible weight. They carry unfinished conversations, unnamed fears, memories that surface only at night, and hopes they no longer know how to speak aloud. Some arrive searching for signs, others for comfort, others for proof that the world holds more than what can be measured or explained. And some arrive without knowing why at all, guided only by a quiet pull they cannot rationalize. The lake does not respond to urgency. It does not react to desire or desperation. It waits. It reflects. It allows each person to encounter themselves in a way that cannot be forced. For some, this feels like revelation. For others, like disappointment. And for many, it feels like nothing at all. But even nothing can leave a mark. There is a fear that lives deep within people, older than language, older than memory. The fear of being lost. Not lost in distance, but lost in meaning, lost in time, lost within oneself. The forest around the lake knows this fear well. Paths twist gently, shadows shift, familiar landmarks fade. Yet very few who walk there truly vanish. Most find their way back, changed not in direction, but in awareness. To be lost, perhaps, is not always to be in danger. Sometimes it is the only way to loosen the grip of certainty. Sometimes it is how the mind learns to slow down, how the heart learns to listen without demanding clarity, in stillness, without distraction. People often hear what they have been avoiding, or they discover that what they feared was never as large as it seemed. And then there is the idea of return. Everyone who comes here eventually leaves. Some return home to the same lives they had before, unchanged on the surface. Others carry something subtle back with them, a gentler way of speaking, a longer pause before reacting, a deeper patience with silence. These changes are rarely dramatic. They unfold slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Perhaps the lake does not give anything at all. Perhaps it only removes what is unnecessary. The noise, the urgency, the need to explain everything immediately. What remains afterward feels lighter, simpler, more honest. If you were to stand there now, you might feel nothing unusual. You might hear only water, wind, and distant movement. Or you might sense a calm awareness settling around you, as if the world itself has slowed enough to notice your presence. There would be no demand placed upon you, no test to pass, no revelation required. You would be allowed to rest inside the moment. And maybe that is the true purpose of such places. Not to change us suddenly, but to remind us that change does not always need force, that understanding can arrive quietly, that peace does not always come from answers, but from acceptance. Eventually, you would leave. Everyone does. The lake would remain holding its stillness, reflecting the sky, remembering every step without attachment. It would not follow you. It would not call you back. It would trust that whatever was needed had already been offered, even if it was not recognized at the time. And as night settles, as thoughts soften and breathing slows, there is nothing left to search for, only the quiet reassurance that it is enough to be here, enough to listen, enough to rest. The world continues, gentle and vast, And somewhere between reflection and silence, sleep arrives naturally, without effort, carrying you forward into calm.